thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate the time in our nice little drive around Detroit car interviews. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why you're here at KubeCon while I avoid going to Canada? Because it's super easy to fall into the trap of getting in the tunnel, and apparently you can't get out again unless you go to customs.
I've heard this, and I'm loving the signs that say "tunnel to Canada" because it sounds more like an instruction.
Right,
like, you know, tunnel to Canada, save yourself.
Yeah, right,
you know?
right. We want more immigration. Come to Canada. Yeah, exactly. I still the thing I tweeted about yesterday is like I still can't get over that Canada is south of us, which is like wait. Like because I'm a East Coaster, right? So the water is always on the east side of me, and having it on the south side and it's going to the wrong country, it's very confusing in my brain.
Yeah, somebody did say that they refer to the Canadians as our neighbours to the south.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think being an American, I think it's a little bit weirder for me, right? But so tell me about KubeCon. What are you doing here?
Yeah, so here all week. So I've been doing eBPF Day yesterday, Cloud Native eBPF Day. Then today we had a Cilium project meeting. This afternoon got a talk at Service MeshCon, and then the main show all week. So
and so how was the eBPF Day? Was there were you doing like a workshop, or was it more like meetings of the team, or?
No, eBPF Day was a co-located event, so we had presentations from people, mostly end users, I would say, actually. Some
cool.
projects as well, but and we wrapped up with a really great panel of people. It was run by Frederick, his surname begins with L, but I don't want to say because I might get it wrong.
Right.
But,
you can see it written down somewhere.
Yes, it might be Lardinois, I think.
Okay. Right.
But from TechCrunch, and he had this fantastic panel of people talking about using eBPF in production. People like New York Times and Google and Bell Canada.
Nice.
Super
Yeah, speaking of Canada.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. And did you get the turnout you were hoping for? Was it all the people and all the things?
It wasn't bad. Yeah, I would say we actually had a bigger turnout in Valencia, but I've got a feeling that there's more co-located events.
Yeah,
there's
more competition.
So yeah,
totally. There were a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just looking at the list and so many choices.
Absolutely.
So the project meeting you were at this morning, what are you focused on, or what are you kicking around for?
Yeah, so this was a new thing for Cilium. I don't know if other projects have done it before, but basically CNCF offered us a meeting room and some time and said go for it. So we publicised beforehand a document and said sign up here if you've got a PR you want to discuss or a problem or maybe a talk you want to give and you want some advice, anything really.
Right.
And to be honest, not that many people signed up, and then loads of people turned up. So we had a pretty packed room. We had to keep going out and getting more chairs.
Right.
And some good discussions are going on. I've snuck out to come and do this.
Right. But we definitely appreciate it. It's we thought it'd be a lot of fun. So. What was I going to ask? All I can picture is a deli counter, right? And you're taking the numbers for all the people who want to talk about things. It's always hard to, I think, although sometimes when you get a group of people who are interested in a discussion around things like PRs or problems they're having or whatever, the conversations that just kind of spontaneously occur are almost better than most other scenarios because you have a bunch of people who are really engaged.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll, come out really well.
There were definitely some good little, groups gathering and talking about, because we had a whole range of people who were new to Cilium who wanted an introduction, and then we had people who had very specific problems that they wanted to discuss or a PR in particular that they wanted to get some help on. So it's some good conversations happening.
Yeah. That's cool. Have you been to Detroit before?
No, this is my first time here.
And what do you think? Have you enjoyed it?
Actually, really nice. So I have a friend who lives out in the suburbs, took me out on a beautiful bike ride on Saturday. So I got to see all the beautiful trees and some amazing, the architecture. There's so much variety.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that myself. It's funny. I'm staying in the what do they call the Renaissance Center here, the Marriott.
I'm told it's called the Ren Cen.
Yeah, I see that all over the place. But I walked in the building. I was like, this looks really familiar. And I remembered I actually did a sales call to General Motors like 15 years ago to OnStar, and it was in that building. And I was like, oh, that's why it looks so familiar.
Okay.
But yeah, it is so different now, like kind of the city in general.
Okay.
And I was talking to some of the locals, and they were kind of saying the same thing. It's just like how much it seems to have kind of come back. But there's still a lot of open space, which, like still waiting for recovery from the pandemic, maybe. But.
Yeah. I've definitely seen a variety of, you can see that there's a lot of disparate levels of income.
Right.
So.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And I do like, Detroit's kind of not really in it anymore, but you get the fall colors really well up in kind of the northern U.S.
I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. And but you said you actually took your bike ride out here on Belle Isle, right?
Yeah. We drove about an hour outside of Detroit, picked up a bike that I could borrow, and then rode all the way back in, circumnavigated the hotel,
right,
and then came out to Belle Isle and rode around here.
Well, at least you got to get a sense of the where the venue was and everything else, right? Which is always nice. I have a panel on Wednesday, and I was like trying to find on the map where exactly the talk is. So I think I've got it. I had to like color it in on the map so I could like remember. But are you giving a talk this time?
Yes. Well, I'm part of the Cilium project updates talk.
Okay.
So. And that's a pretty straightforward set of updates. And then this afternoon at Service Mesh Con, I'm hoping to have a demo for that one. So that's always a little bit more jeopardy.
Yeah. Have you taken to having like recordings as a backup? I've never quite. I think I've done it once, but I'm always like, I'm just going to go with it.
I always say I'm going to have a recording.
Right.
I have about 6 hours to go, so there's still
plenty of time.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be fine. It's always more exciting to do it live anyway. And what's nice though is that the crowd's always with you because they're just as terrified as you are. So that
everybody wants to see a demo and they want it to go well.
Right. So, at least you have a soft crowd normally. So what will you be demoing?
So Service Mesh, essentially, Cilium Service Mesh. And we have a nice integration with some Grafana metrics. So it's a very simple, we've got a demo app that's sitting behind Kubernetes ingress set up to be of Cilium type. So Cilium Service Mesh is providing that ingress functionality, and under the covers it programs Envoy, and then get a nice service map inside a Grafana dashboard and get some really good metrics.
Nice. So. Yeah, one of the things it's funny on the Insider show that you've done, you did before, but also in the old Level Up show I used to do. It's like one of the things that is so hard about using these kind of modern distributed systems, right, is like you really need those visuals to be able to wrap your head around what's actually going on, because the whole idea of it, right, is it's distributed and somewhat disconnected, but that means your brain has to like connect it all in your head, and that's really hard. I really appreciate things like Grafana, which really, at least for me, helped me wrap my head around it again. So that's cool. You were saying that there's a bunch of new integration with Grafana?
Yeah, that's sort of new news this week, that Cilium and Grafana are working together, and we've got some really nice integrations. So not only can you export Cilium metrics into the Grafana dashboard, but we also have some Grafana graphs and service maps and so on visible from inside the Hubble UI.
Oh, that's cool.
So it sort of works both ways. If you want it in the single pane of glass in Hubble, it's there. If you want it in the single pane of glass in Grafana, it's there. Right.
So whichever one you're like already committed to.
Yeah.
So one of the things, especially with things like Service Mesh, can you give the kind of audience a brief run, like what is a Service Mesh? Like why do I want one?
Yeah, so at one level you think, but surely Kubernetes is running applications and they're networked together.
Right.
Like they're already talking to each other.
Yeah.
But Service Mesh is giving you this kind of application layer, layer 7 additional features. So things like retries, load balancing, so you can load balance across multiple instances of a the whatever back-end service it is. MTLS is a common feature that people want to see from service mesh, and observability is a huge thing.
Right.
And
right.
you know, but I think one of the things that we're quite keen on with Cilium service mesh is that a lot of this functionality can be provided by the network, and from an application developer's point of view, they shouldn't really have to care what's happening at
right.
different layers of the network. It should be my service wants to talk to another service, and I need this kind of configuration or this level of retries, or I want to roll out this canary deployment. And so we're kind of seeing it as 3 layers now. There's the data plane itself, actual network connectivity, passing packets around. There's at the top, the configuration. Do you want to configure an ingress gateway? Do you want to configure gateway API? There's a lot of work going on in the, it's called the Gamma initiative, gateway API, sort of new version that will support service mesh abstractions like HTTP routes.
Right.
So you configure that, and then in the middle, there's what you could call a control plane, but increasingly I don't think that application developers need to care about.
Right.
But this is the thing that's kind of wiring up how proxies are configured. That level.
Kind of Kubernetes in general, right? But service mesh kind of in more specific. One of the things I really appreciate, being a long time, application developer, and I guess we're not going to go that way because the road is closed. And here is a goose.
We should try not to hit the goose.
Yeah. Who's busily crossing the road. But one of the things I really like is this kind of idea of I just want to give the system a hint about what I want, right? Rather than having it, the number of times you have to go through an install guide and say, okay, so this is where the database is, and this is where the web server is, and here are the ports they're going to talk across, and all this stuff. And I don't really, I just wanted to, I just want to kind of describe it and then let it figure it out. So it's one of the things I really appreciate kind of about the, more this kind of modern idea of like, you're just going to describe the system. I really think it gets back to even Puppet really was a big part of this, where you had this, I'm going to describe what I want, and then the software actually makes it true. Right. Yeah. Which at least for me is much better. And then on top of that, keeps it true, which I think is a part people don't fully appreciate how hard that is over time.
Yes, right? Yes, that kind of state reconciliation thing, which I think is the thing that makes Kubernetes what it is, a level above the things that came before it, is this constant reconciliation of here's my desired state, here's the actual state. Right,
and not relying on humans to actually make that state true, right?
Yes.
Which, like I said, I really appreciate it. The other thing is I think it also lets us concentrate on, things that are, for lack of a better term, higher value, right? So we can start to think about, hey, can I make this more like an event-driven system, or, integrating like serverless and all those things, because I can just put my code where I need to, and then, I just have to kind of configure it, and then it just works, right? Which I think is huge. With the service mesh, have you been, I guess one of the things I'm still trying to wrap my head around is I feel like multiple Kubernetes clusters is weird. In, I want it to be just one thing, but this is I guess kind of an ongoing struggle. It's like there's people on both sides of this fence where it's like, no, I want to have all these different clusters, right? But I want to treat them as one, or whatever. Do you have any kind of feeling about this? Am I just crazy that I think that there should just be one?
So it's one of the features that a lot of users really like about Cilium, and it's almost too easy. So it's called cluster mesh.
Right.
And you have your services, and you can annotate them, just say, well, this service is a global service. And you have to go around and say, for each cluster, here is my service, I don't know, I'll call it tree, because I'm seeing a lot of trees. So here's my tree service, and I want that to be a global service. And in another cluster, I've also got the tree service, and I will mark that as a global service. And cluster mesh kind of communicates these shared services, having a nice tour of a car park now.
Yeah, I keep running into closed roads. I'm like, wait. So first of all, the navigation should be helping me with this problem. Second, why are all the roads closed? Can I get out over there? It doesn't look like it. All right, I'm going this way.
We might have to just go back out the way we came.
Yeah. This is the adventure of doing the interview in the car, is that we'll interrupt for navigation problems.
Oh yeah, I'll get back to cluster mesh. Yeah, so you have these services that are essentially the same service. They just happen to exist in more than one cluster. Mm-hmm. And you can mark them as, I want kind of local affinity. So if there is an available a pod, there's an instance of it running locally, so I'd prefer to use that. But if there isn't, I will use one in another cluster.
Right.
And it, as I say, because you're just annotating services, it kind of seems a little bit too straightforward.
But
and I think that's a really great example of how the network can provide a lot of functionality for you that users shouldn't have to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
Users shouldn't have to sort of think about like which bits of network are talking to which other bits.
Right.
Making it at a service level, which is pretty much an application level, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. No, that I definitely agree. I mean, it all kind of comes back to that. I guess the that's a super nice feature, because I think that's, at least for me, right, part of my problem about getting my head wrapped around it is like I don't want to think about the fact that there's multiple clusters, right? I want my service available all the time, as close to the user as possible.
And you probably want those multiple clusters so you can do things like as close to the user as possible, or like availability zones, or But other than that, you're not deliberately saying this
one has to go there or that one.
I mean, I suppose you might want to have different services in different clusters for isolation reasons, but then you probably, the multi-cluster thing is less of a, that's a whole different problem.
They actually don't want to, you don't really want them communicating in general. And maybe the air gap model, right?
Yeah.
I think the most common example I've kind of heard is around security, but at least for me, like I worked on a system which had it was one of those ones where it was used around the world, but its biggest load was at 9 a.m. ish, right? At whatever time zone, because that's when everybody logged into it. And so to make it actually perform, we actually had all this complicated stuff, and this was well before Kubernetes existed, but all this complicated stuff to spin up a bunch of hardware, essentially at 8:50 in whatever time zone, so that it would be able to handle the load, and then spin it back down again, and being able to essentially you have not only this kind of management of where is the service available or the functionality available, but then also like, can you build in scheduling such that that's also as sophisticated? Can you, I really want to see, one of the things I've been toying around with is, essentially getting into like AI or machine learning for scheduling. Which I think would be super interesting, because I want to, I want the computer to notice that there's all these logins at 9 a.m. and preemptively spin up a bunch of containers to prepare for that, because I think, it seems obvious to me.
One of the first things that I did with containers, we had a startup that was called microscaling, and it was this idea of auto-scaling before auto-scaling was cool. And using kind of control theory, I think it was called. There's kind of trying to predict, based on how demand's changing, like how many more containers we're going to have to spin up, like how fast is demand changing, and based on that.
Well, that's kind of the problem with current auto-scaling, right? Is that by the time the auto-scaling starts, it's too late.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you have to guess beforehand when it's going to happen. And guessing things like what humans are going to do is such an easy problem, right? Of course, completely joking.
And you might be better off with a rule that just says, at 8:50 we'll spin up.
Right.
Double the number of instances.
So coming back to KubeCon a little bit, is there any particular talk, or is there somebody you're really glad to have seen or going to see that is a particular driver for this particular KubeCon for you?
I'm not going to call out anybody specifically, but it's just so great to see people in person. I've already run into a few people that I haven't seen in person for a couple of years, and it's great to have the opportunity to see people face to face again. There was some of that in Valencia, but there's a whole other
lot more.
Group.
Yeah, well, I ran into Chris Short yesterday,
Okay.
who I did a Twitch show for like a year and a half every week with him. We were on the same team. Yesterday was the first day I met him in person.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it was super interesting. We of course had the discussion about the fact that he was super tall with the last name Short. So I was at least expecting him to be quite tall, but you know, because I'm not that tall. I'm like 5'10", right? And so that was interesting. But yeah, also I think I've now met more people here that I've been talking to for the last 2 years that I had never met in person than I have met people in person that I have met in person before.
I think I follow.
Yeah. It's super complicated, but yeah, isn't that crazy though? It's so weird.
Yeah, and not everybody's here yet because we're still in pre-show.
Right.
The main event kicks off tomorrow.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I mean, it's it's still easy to kind of go and register for your daily sticker, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been shaping up pretty cool. I wish I was staying the whole week, but I have to get back to give lecture on Thursday.
Oh,
so so I can't stay the whole time, which is too bad. But you know, you do what you can. It's funny because now I've moved out of industry into academia about a year and a half ago, and the schedule's all wrong. It's really funny. It's like the academic conferences are kind of lined up with the school year, and all the industry conferences are like right smack dab in the middle of the semester. And so it's kind of interesting, and it's kind of what I've been trying to figure out is like, is there a way we could fix this somehow? Because I would like to see more kind of academic people at KubeCon.
Yeah.
But like I know for me, I had to like get coverage for a lecture. It's kind of a big deal for me to travel right now.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of interesting in the eBPF world. We have, it seems to me anyway, that there's a lot more overlap between what's happening in academia. And we quite often get submissions from students or graduate students and people who are working on PhDs and doing things with eBPF. So there's definitely an overlap in interest. Right.
No, definitely. I mean, it's like one of the things that I never really knew anything about till I joined Boston University is this concept of multi-party computation or secure multi-party computation, which is like, I was like, I'd never even talked about this stuff before, but so there's a couple of experts on my, in my department. And what it is like, I want to compute something like, the average of a set of numbers, but you don't want to share your information with me, and I don't want to share my information with you, and I don't also want to share any information with a third party. Like, there's no holder of the information. And so it's basically, so what you can do is you can kind of, the example that was given to me, and I don't tell it very well, but is like, say we both got a grade on a test, right? And we want to know how the class, how we did as a group on average. So what we can do is you take your number and you add an arbitrary number to it, and then kind of tell me the total, and then we kind of go around the group, and then you keep adding it up, and then you can take the average of that, and you'll get the right average once you withdraw all the arbitrary numbers. But I never see your grade, right? And we don't have to have a third party that we trust that holds the grade either. Which is, what I think of as the normal way of doing that, right? But yeah, so they did it was like a front page Boston Globe article using like some of the professors from BU to do basically it was a bunch of research around the average pay for women in Boston versus men. And obviously, a lot of companies didn't want to share that information, and so that was the technique they used. There was another one too that I think is super interesting. Is Boston was trying to figure out how to make ride sharing safer, in that when they pull over, to like give them spots so they wouldn't be basically double parked in the middle of the street. And Uber and Lyft, they wanted their data, but Uber and Lyft don't want to share their data with anybody about where their drop-offs are. But so they could figure it out by this same technique, by using, I don't know exactly the details of how it worked, but and so I found out that the bar that's like 5 blocks from my house is the single biggest drop-off location for Uber and Lyft in the entire city.
Wow.
I was like, I knew the place is popular, but like, holy, no wonder there's all these cars all there, and lying down the street.
I've not come across how you do those calculations, but I have come across the problem a little bit in, so I'm involved with this organisation called OpenUK, which is trying to advocate for more use of open source and open
Yeah,
data.
yeah.
And one of the, I guess, meetings that I went to, there was a discussion about, how you might have essentially sovereign data or industry data that you want to be able to collaborate on without actually sharing the data. So,
yeah, that's exactly what this does. It's super neat. There are some challenges about like what kind of results you can get to, but that's where the research is going. Like, they're trying to solve as many of those as they possibly can, at the moment. So you can do some calculations, but you can't do everything you might want to. But still, I was like, it's like brilliant. It's really interesting. So if OpenUK wants to get involved with, so part of the other hat I wear at BU is we do this experiential learning program called Spark, where students work on projects for like external parties. So it ends up being mostly like local government and nonprofits, but like one of the ones we're working on is for this organization called Museums Moving Forward, which is trying to first estimate the equity at museums, right now just on like staffing, but I think ultimately they're interested in like art and stuff as well. And so they're going to use this MPC technology to do so. And our Spark students, so undergraduates and graduate students are building the software. So it's kind of cool.
Very cool.
But speaking of OpenUK as well, I just saw a TikTok from a guy running for mayor of Toronto, who was advocating much more use of open source. And that's like part of his platform. I was like, that's very cool. But yeah.
That is cool. Was he thinking of it as code, data transparency?
More as actually of like saving money. Of the, like why is every city building the same software?
Right.
Which I am a strong proponent of as well.
Absolutely.
It was funny. I worked on a system years ago for the state of New York, and I don't know if it's still true, but if you build software for the state of New York, it's required by state law that any other place in New York can have the software for free. Because it's open source within the state. And which I was like, why isn't that true for like any software that gets built custom, for a government entity, right? Because taxpayers paid for it,
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'm supposed to like wait for this light or because there's no
Hard to
other
say.
way to
Actually,
go, right?
There is.
I'm going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought at first this was a line of cars waiting, but no, they're just parked there. See, it's always an adventure when we drive there. Yeah.
When you've done this a few
more times, it'll be a little simpler. I think my experience with driving around Boston makes it so that I have a little bit more experience with craziness. All right, well, why don't we wrap the interview and just kind of say, hey, thanks so much for coming, and we really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for tour of Belle Isle.
Yeah, exactly.